The Hawthorne Manor stood like a beacon in the fading twilight, its sprawling ballroom a tapestry of elegance woven with golden light from crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen stars. A 12-piece orchestra played a waltz that curled through the room, its notes blending with the soft clink of champagne flutes and the hum of 100 voices. Each guest, dressed in silks and tailored tuxedos, moving with the grace of a world where wealth and beauty reigned. This was no ordinary night. It was the annual gala for Laura Grayson's Pediatric Health Foundation, a spectacle of philanthropy that drew the city's elite to celebrate her vision of hope for children in need. Yet, at the edge of this glittering scene, 12-year-old Emma Grayson sat in a sleek black wheelchair, her sapphire blue dress shimmering faintly, chosen because it was her mother's favorite color. A quiet act of devotion she hoped might draw Laura's gaze. 2 years ago, a car accident had shattered Emma's spine and her world, leaving her legs still and her mother a stranger, consumed by grief and the demands of her public persona. Laura, radiant in a silver gown that caught every eye, moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her laughter bright as she shook hands with donors and posed for photographers, her smile never quite reaching her daughter. Emma's fingers traced the delicate embroidery on her dress, her hazel eyes searching the sea of faces for a flicker of recognition. But the guests seemed to look through her, their discomfort with her disability a wall she couldn't breach. The other children, in their own orbit of giggles and whispered secrets about sequined dresses and dance moves, formed circles that never opened to include her. Adults, too, averted their eyes, their polite smiles faltering as they passed, as if her wheelchair carried a contagion of sorrow they feared to touch. Emma tried to sit taller, to make herself less small. She remembered the days when Laura would scoop her up in their modest living room, twirling her until the world blurred into laughter, their voices mingling in a song only they knew. Now, the orchestra's melody felt like a cruel echo, each note a reminder of a joy she could no longer reach. A waiter glided past with a tray of sparkling drinks, and Emma reached out, her movements slow and deliberate, her fingers trembling as she stretched for a glass. He didn't pause, didn't lower the tray, leaving her to fumble and nearly knock it over, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Across the room, Laura's laughter rang out, clear and sharp, as she charmed a silver-haired donor, her back turned to her daughter. Her fingers tapped the armrests of her wheelchair, keeping time with the music, a restless rhythm that mirrored the ache in her soul. She watched the dancers spin, their shadows flickering across the polished oak floor, their movements a language she could no longer speak. Once, she had been the girl who twirled without care, her mother's hands steady and sure, but now she felt like a ghost, present but unseen. The gala's splendor only deepened her isolation. Each burst of laughter and clink of glasses, a reminder that she was on the outside, watching a world that no longer included her. Emma's gaze drifted to her mother again, hoping for a glance, a smile, anything to bridge the chasm that had grown since the accident. But Laura's attention remained elsewhere, her focus on the crowd that adored her, Emma's hands gripping the armrests as if they could anchor her to a moment when she was more than a shadow. In this room of light and celebration, Emma Grayson was a solitary figure, her heart yearning for someone to stop, to see her, to offer a hand not out of pity but out of care. Their elegance a stark contrast to the quiet ache in Emma Grayson's heart. She sat at the edge of the dance floor, her sapphire dress catching fleeting glints of chandelier light, her fingers still from their restless tapping, now curled tightly in her lap. Laura Grayson, her mother, stood at the heart of the gala, her silver gown shimmering as she leaned in to charm a cluster of donors, her voice carrying the warmth Emma craved but couldn't reach. The distance between them felt vast, a canyon, carved by 2 years of grief and unspoken guilt since the accident that stole Emma's ability to walk. She watched a girl in a pink dress spin past, her laughter bright, and Emma's throat tightened. Memories of her own spinning days with Laura flooding back, days when her mother's arms were her safe haven. Not a memory she chased in vain. Across the room, Nathan Brooks adjusted the collar of his rented suit, feeling like an outsider among the polished elite. A former firefighter, he was here only because his cousin, the gala's caterer, had begged him to fill an empty seat, promising his 9-year-old daughter, Mia, a night of cake and wonder. Mia, her dark curls bouncing, stood beside him, her eyes wide as she took in the grandeur, but her attention snagged on Emma, alone in her wheelchair. "Daddy, that girl looks sad," Mia whispered, tugging his sleeve, her small face creased with concern. Nathan followed her gaze, and something in Emma's hunched shoulders, the way her eyes tracked the dancers with a quiet hunger, struck a chord deep within him. He knew that look, it was the same one Mia had worn after her mother left them, a silent plea to be seen, to matter. Without a word, he gave Mia's hand a gentle squeeze. "Stay here, Peanut," he said, his voice low, and began weaving through the crowd, his broad frame parting the sea of silken suits with ease. The guests barely noticed him, their eyes fixed on the spectacle of wealth. But Nathan's focus was singular, drawn to the girl who seemed to fade into the shadows. Reaching Emma, he crouched beside her wheelchair, his hazel eyes level with hers, softening as he saw the guarded hope in her gaze. "Would you like to join the dance?" he asked, his tone warm, carrying the steady calm of someone who'd pulled people from burning buildings. Emma blinked, her breath catching, as if testing his words for mockery, her hands tightening on the folds of her dress. "I can't," she murmured, her voice barely audible, her eyes dropping to her lap where her legs lay still. Nathan tilted his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Who says?" Before she could answer, he stood, moving behind her chair with a quiet confidence, his hands resting lightly on the handles. A few guests nearby turned, their brows lifting in surprise, whispers stirring like leaves in a breeze. Emma stiffened, her heart racing, but Nathan's voice came again, steady and sure. "Trust me, just for a moment." Hesitant, she nodded, and he guided her wheelchair smoothly to the edge of the dance floor, where the music swelled, a soft, lilting melody that seemed to wrap them in its embrace. Kneeling again, he offered his hands, his calloused palms open and inviting. Emma's fingers trembled as she reached out, her grip tentative but growing firmer as she felt his strength. With a gentle pull, Nathan supported her weight, helping her balance as they began to sway, her feet brushing the floor, her hands clutching his shoulders like an anchor in a storm. It wasn't the wild twirling she'd once known with her mother, but a quieter dance, a gentle rhythm that felt like a gift. Emma's lips parted in a small, disbelieving smile, her eyes brightening as the world narrowed to this moment, the music, and the man who saw her when no one else did. Across the room, Mia clapped her hands, her grin wide, but Laura Grayson, catching sight of the scene, froze mid-sentence, her champagne flute pausing at her lips. A flicker of something guilt perhaps, or longing crossed her face, unnoticed by the donors around her. Nathan, oblivious to the stares, kept his focus on Emma, adjusting his movements to her rhythm, his steady presence a shield against the crowd's murmurs. For the first time in years, Emma felt alive. Not a shadow, but a girl who could still dance, who could still feel the music in her bones. The moment stretched, fragile and precious, until a sharp voice cut through the air. "Claire Voss, Laura's assistant." Her eyes narrowed as she approached, her heels clicking with purpose. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her tone laced with disapproval. But Emma didn't hear her, lost in the joy of being seen. The ballroom's golden glow seemed to pulse with amatis. The crowd's murmurs grew, a mix of awe and unease rippling through the guests, their eyes darting between the girl in the wheelchair and the broad-shouldered man who dared to break the gala's polished rhythm. Laura Grayson, standing near a marble pillar, her silver gown catching the light, watched with a tightness in her chest, her smile frozen as she saw her daughter's radiant expression. Now, seeing Emma's smile, a pang of guilt sliced through her, sharp and unyielding. She wanted to cross the room, to join them, but her feet felt rooted. Nathan, oblivious to Laura's turmoil, leaned closer to Emma, his voice a warm murmur. "You're stealing the show, kid." Emma's laugh, soft and unguarded, was a sound Laura hadn't heard in too long, and it stirred memories of their old life, when they'd dance in their living room, carefree and close. Across the room, Mia Brooks stood on her tiptoes, her dark curls bouncing as she watched her father and Emma, her heart swelling with pride. But the moment's warmth was shattered. "This is highly inappropriate," Claire hissed, her voice low but venomous, her eyes flicking to Emma with a pity that felt like a slap. Nathan straightened, his jaw tight, but kept his tone even. "She wanted to dance, so we're dancing." Claire's lips pursed, her gaze darting to Laura, who stood frozen, her champagne flute trembling slightly. The crowd's whispers grew louder, some guests nodding in approval, others shaking their heads, their judgment a heavy weight. Emma's smile faltered, her hands slipping from Nathan's shoulders as she sensed the shift in the air, her old fears of being a burden creeping back. Nathan noticed, his heart twisting at the sight of her fading joy, and he crouched beside her, his voice steady. "Hey, you're the star here, not them. Want to keep going?" Emma hesitated, her eyes flicking to her mother, hoping for a sign, but Laura's face was unreadable. Claire seized the moment, stepping closer, her voice dripping with false concern. "Laura, perhaps we should intervene. This could upset the guests." Laura's throat tightened, her mind racing with memories of Emma's accident, the hospital, the promises she'd broken to be there for her daughter. She wanted to speak, to defend Emma's moment, but years of hiding behind her philanthropy left her silent, her heart a battlefield of guilt and duty. Nathan, sensing Emma's growing unease, stood tall. "She's not hurting anyone. Let her have this." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a man who'd faced fire and loss, who knew the cost of standing still. Emma's eyes shone with gratitude, but the crowd's murmurs grew sharper, some whispering about propriety, others about courage. Mia, watching from the sidelines, clutched her father's jacket, her small voice piping up, "Daddy's right, she's happy." The innocence of her words cut through the tension, and a few guests smiled, their hearts softening. Laura's fingers tightened around her glass, her mind flashing to the nights she'd sat by Emma's bedside, promising to dance with her again, promises drowned in her own fear of failure. Nathan, unaware of Laura's inner storm, whispered to Emma, "Your mum could do this with you. You know, she's right there." The words were gentle, but they struck Emma like a spark, igniting a hope she'd buried deep. She looked at Laura, her eyes pleading, but Claire's hand on Laura's arm was firm, her whisper sharp. "You can't afford a scene, not tonight." Laura's heart pounded, her love for Emma warring with the pressure of her public role, her silence, a betrayal she couldn't voice. The orchestra played on, oblivious to the drama, its melody a fragile thread holding the moment together. Emma's hands trembled in her lap, the brief joy of dancing now tangled with the familiar sting of her mother's distance. Nathan's steady presence kept her grounded, but the crowd's eyes weighed heavily, their whispers a reminder of her difference. Claire's disapproval hung in the air, a shadow over Emma's light, but Nathan's resolve didn't waver, his hand resting lightly on her chair, a silent promise to stand by her. The ballroom, with its glittering facade, felt like a stage for a quiet revolution, one where a single act of kindness could shift the tide. The Hawthorne Manor's ballroom shimmered with a deceptive calm, the orchestra's melody a gentle undercurrent, to the rising tension that crackled like static beneath the gallus polished surface. Emma Grayson, her sapphire dress catching the chandelier's glow, sat in her wheelchair, her heart still fluttering from the dance with Nathan Brooks, but now shadowed by the sharp edge of Claire Voss's disapproval. Nathan stood protectively beside her, his broad frame a quiet barrier against the crowd's curious stares, his hazel eyes scanning the room for any further threat to Emma's fragile joy. Laura Grayson, caught in a knot of donors near a gilded table, felt her daughter's gaze like a weight, her silver gown no shield against the guilt that surged within her. She'd seen Emma smile during the dance, a fleeting echo of the girl she'd twirled in their old life. The crowd's whispers had shifted, some guests murmuring admiration for Nathan's kindness, others questioning his audacity, their voices a low hum that made Emma shrink slightly in her chair, her hands twisting the fabric of her dress. Nathan, sensing her unease, knelt beside her, his voice a steady anchor. "You did great out there, Emma. Don't let anyone dim that light." His words were a lifeline, but Emma's eyes darted to her mother, searching for a sign that Laura saw. Truly saw her, not as a symbol of loss, but as the daughter she still loved. "We need to refocus on the speech, Laura. The donors are waiting." Her tone was smooth, but her eyes flicked to Emma with a coldness that made Nathan's instincts flare. His years as a firefighter honing his sense for danger, dressed in charm. Mia Brooks, standing near the desert table, her dark curls framing a worried frown, tugged at her father's sleeve, her whisper urgent. "Daddy, that lady was talking on her phone earlier, in the hallway. She sounded mad, saying something about making sure things go right tonight." Nathan's jaw tightened, his mind piecing together fragments. Claire's possessiveness, her quickness to control Laura, the way she'd framed Emma's dance as a disruption. He glanced at Laura, whose face was a mask of conflict. her fingers gripping her champagne flute as if it could steady her heart. The gala sparkle felt hollow now, a stage for something darker, and Nathan's gut told him Claire was at its center. He leaned toward Emma, his voice low. "Does Claire handle a lot for your mom? Like important stuff?" Emma nodded, her voice small. "Everything. Mom's schedule, her speeches, even her medicine. Claire is always there, saying it's for Mom's image." The word image landed like a stone, and Nathan's eyes narrowed, a suspicion forming that Claire's loyalty was a facade, a means to an end he couldn't yet see. Across the room, Laura excused herself from the donors, her steps faltering as she approached Emma, drawn by a mother's instinct she couldn't ignore. But Claire intercepted, her hand light but firm on Laura's arm. "The speech is in 10 minutes. We can't have distractions." Laura's eyes met Emma's, and for a moment, the noise of the gala faded, leaving only the raw ache of their fractured bond. "I just want to check on her," Laura murmured, but Claire's grip tightened, her voice a velvet blade. "You'll look weak if you falter now. Think of the foundation." Laura's shoulders sagged, her resolve crumbling under the weight of expectation, and she turned back to the donors, leaving Emma's hope unanswered. Nathan saw the exchange, his heart sinking for Emma, who bit her lip to hide her hurt, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. He wanted to storm over, to shake Laura awake, but Mia's small hand in his kept him grounded. Instead, he wheeled Emma closer to the dance floor's edge, away from Claire's shadow, and whispered, "You're stronger than all of this, you know that." Emma's smile was faint, but her nod was firm, a spark of resilience kindled by his belief in her. The orchestra shifted to a slower tune, and Nathan's mind raced, piecing together Mia's overheard words and Emma's trust in Claire's control. He remembered a moment earlier, Claire's hand lingering near Laura's drink, her eyes darting as if checking for witnesses. The realization hit like a spark in dry grass. Claire wasn't just controlling Laura's image, she was orchestrating something bigger, something that used Emma's vulnerability as a pawn. Nathan's protective instincts surged. He glanced at Mia, who was watching Emma with wide, empathetic eyes, and made a decision. "Mia, stay with Emma for a minute. I need to check something." He moved toward the catering area, where Claire's coat hung on a rack, her designer purse tucked beneath it. His hands moved quickly, searching for anything, a note, a phone, a clue. His fingers brushed a small notebook, its pages filled with schedules and cryptic notes. "Ensure L's speech emphasizes sacrifice. E's condition as leverage." Nathan's blood ran cold. Claire was using Emma's disability to craft a narrative, one that painted Laura as a martyr while sidelining her daughter. The gala's lights seemed to dim, the music a distant hum, as Nathan realized the stakes: Emma's heart, Laura's trust, and a family on the brink of breaking. He slipped the notebook into his pocket, his resolve hardening. Claire's game was about to unravel, but he needed to act fast, before her plan could hurt Emma any further. The Hawthorne Manor's ballroom hummed with anticipation, the chandeliers casting a soft glow over the crowd as the gala neared its climax. The moment for Laura Grayson's keynote speech drawing close. Emma Grayson, her sapphire dress slightly creased from her earlier dance, sat in her wheelchair near the edge of the room, her heart a tangle of hope and hurt after her mother's failure to reach her, overshadowed by Claire Voss's iron grip. Nathan Brooks, his rented suit now feeling like armor, stood a few paces away, the weight of Claire's notebook burning in his pocket, its pages a damning map of her manipulation. He'd returned to Emma and Mia, his daughter's small hand, clutching Emma's, their quiet chatter a fragile shield against the crowd's curious glances. Laura, poised near the stage, her silver gown a beacon under the spotlight, clutched her notecards, her eyes flickering toward Emma with a longing she couldn't voice. Her role as the foundation's leader, a cage she'd built herself. The orchestra had paused, the silence heavy with expectation, but Nathan's mind was a storm, piecing together Claire's plan to exploit Emma's disability for Laura's public image, a betrayal that twisted his gut with the same fury he'd felt facing fires that threatened lives. Emma, sensing the shift in Nathan's posture, looked up, her hazel eyes sharp with a question. "What's wrong?" she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the crowd's murmur. Nathan knelt beside her, his voice low but steady. "I found something. Emma, Claire's not who she seems. We're going to fix this, okay?" Emma's lips parted, fear and trust warring in her gaze, but she nodded, her small hand squeezing Mia's tighter. Across the room, Claire adjusted her sleek black dress, her smile a practiced mask as she whispered final instructions to Laura, her hand lingering on her shoulder like a claim. Nathan's discovery of the notebook had lit a fuse, and he knew the speech was Claire's stage to cement her narrative, Laura as the selfless mother, Emma as the tragic prop. He couldn't let that happen. Not to the girl whose smile had lit up the dance floor, not to the mother who was too lost to see her own daughter's strength. As the MC announced Laura's name, the crowd applauded, their faces a sea of admiration. But Nathan saw the cracks in Laura's composure, the way her hands trembled as she stepped toward the podium. He moved closer to Emma, his voice urgent. "Emma, you know your mum better than anyone. If you could say something to her, right now, what would it be?" Emma's breath hitched, her eyes glistening as she looked at Laura, now at the microphone, her voice beginning to carry over the room. "I'd tell her I'm still here," Emma said softly, her words raw, "that I don't want to be her cause. I just want to be her daughter." Nathan's throat tightened, and he made a split-second decision. "Then, let's tell her," he said, pushing Emma's wheelchair toward the stage, Mia trailing close behind, her eyes wide but determined. The crowd parted, their whispers rising like a tide, some shocked, others intrigued, as Emma approached the stage, her chin lifted with a courage that belied her 12 years. Laura faltered mid-sentence, her eyes locking onto Emma, the note slipping slightly in her grip. Claire, standing at the stage's edge, stiffened, her smile faltering as she hissed, "Laura, keep going." But Emma's voice, clear and unwavering, cut through the air. "Mom, wait." The room went still, the weight of her words halting Laura's speech, the spotlight casting their shadows long across the polished floor. Emma wheeled closer, her hands steady despite the tremor in her heart. "I know you're doing all this for kids like me, but I'm not just a story for your foundation. I'm your daughter, and I miss you." The words hung in the air, raw and unadorned, and Laura's face crumpled, tears welling as she stepped away from the podium, her public mask shattering. Nathan, standing behind Emma, felt a surge of pride, but his eyes were on Claire, whose composure cracked, her hand twitching toward her purse as if to hide something. Seizing the moment, Nathan stepped forward, pulling the notebook from his pocket and holding it aloft. "Laura, you need to see this," he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd faced chaos and won. He opened the notebook, reading aloud a single line, "Use ease condition to highlight L's sacrifice." The crowd gasped, murmurs of disbelief rippling through the room as Laura's gaze snapped to Claire, her face pulling. "What is this?" Laura demanded, her voice shaking but sharp. Claire's eyes darted, her mask slipping as she stammered, "It's not what it looks like." But Nathan pressed forward, handing the notebook to Laura, who scanned the pages, her hands trembling as she read Claire's meticulous notes plans, to frame Emma as a symbol of pity, to secure donations by exploiting her daughter's pain. The betrayal hit Laura like a physical blow, her knees buckling as she gripped the podium for support. "You used her," Laura whispered, her voice breaking. "You used my daughter." The crowd erupted in shocked whispers, some stepping back, others glaring at Claire, who backed away, her heels catching on the stage's edge. Emma, her eyes locked on her mother, wheeled closer, her voice soft but firm. "Mom, I just want us to be us again." Laura dropped to her knees beside Emma's chair, tears streaming as she pulled her daughter into a fierce embrace, the first in years that felt like home. The crowd's murmurs softened, some wiping tears, others applauding Emma's courage. The ballroom transformed by a moment of raw human truth. Nathan stepped back, Mia at his side, his heart full as he watched mother and daughter reconnect, the notebook now in the hands of a donor who promised to investigate Claire's actions. The gala's glitter faded, replaced by something truer, something that no amount of wealth could buy. The Hawthorne Manor's ballroom, once a stage for polished elegance, now held a quieter kind of magic, the air thick with the afterglow of Emma Grayson's brave stand and Laura Grayson's tearful embrace. The chandeliers cast a warm, golden light over the crowd, their murmurs softening into a hum of awe and empathy as mother and daughter clung to each other, Laura's silver gown pooling around her as she knelt beside Emma's wheelchair, face buried in her daughter's hair. Emma's sapphire dress, slightly rumpled from the night's emotions, seemed to glow with a new kind of radiance. her hazel eyes bright with tears but also with hope, the kind she hadn't dared feel since the accident that fractured their world. Nathan Brooks stood a few steps back, his rented suit creased but his heart full. His daughter Mia's hand warm in his as she watched with a grin, her dark curls bouncing as she whispered, "They're happy now, Daddy." The orchestra, sensing the shift, struck up a gentle melody, a soft waltz that felt like a bomb, its notes weaving through the room like a promise of healing. Laura's hands trembled as she cupped Emma's face, her voice a broken whisper. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I got lost, but I'm here now." Emma nodded, her own tears falling as she leaned into her mother's touch, the years of distance collapsing in that single, fragile moment. The crowd, still reeling from Nathan's exposure of Claire Voss's betrayal, watched in reverent silence, some clutching their partner's hands, others wiping their eyes, moved by the raw reunion unfolding before them. Claire, her sleek black dress no longer a symbol of authority, had slipped away in the chaos, her heels a fading echo as she fled the manor, her notebook now in the hands of a donor who'd promised to alert the Foundation's board. Nathan's instincts, honed from years of facing crises, told him she wouldn't return, but his focus wasn't on her, it was on Emma, whose courage had shifted the night's tide, and on Laura, who was finally seeing her daughter clearly. Mia tugged at Nathan's sleeve, her voice bright with an idea. "Daddy, they should dance again, like we did." Nathan's lips curved into a smile, and he stepped forward, his voice gentle but carrying the steady calm of a man who knew how to lead in a storm. "Laura, Emma's a natural on the dance floor. Want to give it a try?" Laura's breath caught, her eyes flicking to Emma, who looked up with a shy, hopeful smile, her hands twisting in her lap. The memory of their old living room dances, filled with laughter and clumsy spins, surged through Laura, and she nodded, her voice thick. "Yes, yes, I'd love that." Nathan moved to Emma's side, his hands steady as he helped adjust her wheelchair, while Laura stood, her silver gown catching the light as she reached for her daughter's hands. The crowd parted, creating a space on the dance floor, their faces soft with encouragement, a stark contrast to the earlier whispers of judgment. The orchestra's waltz swelled, its melody wrapping the trio in a cocoon of sound. It wasn't graceful, not like the polished dances of the galla's earlier hours. Laura's movements were hesitant, her fear of failing Emma evident in her trembling grip, but Emma's smile was unwavering, her eyes locked on her mother's. Nathan, ever the anchor, adjusted his hold, ensuring Emma felt secure, his presence a quiet reminder that they weren't alone. Mia, unable to resist, darted onto the floor, her small hands reaching for Emma's wheelchair, adding her own joyful energy to the moment, her laughter a bright counterpoint to the music. The crowd watched, some recording on their phones, others simply standing in awe, their applause soft but heartfelt as the four moved together, a makeshift family bound by courage and care. Laura's tears fell freely now, but they were different, not born of guilt but of love, of rediscovery, her heart cracking open to let Emma back in. She whispered, "I've missed you so much," and Emma's answering smile was a beacon, a promise that they could rebuild what grief had torn apart. Nathan, watching the two, felt a lump in his throat, his own memories of his wife's departure, the nights he'd held Mia through her tears, softened by this moment of connection. The ballroom, with its opulent decor, felt less like a museum of wealth and more like a sanctuary, a place where broken bonds could mend. As the waltz reached its crescendo, Laura leaned down, kissing Emma's forehead, and the crowd's applause grew, a wave of warmth that enveloped them. Nathan stepped back, giving mother and daughter their space, but Mia stayed close, her hand resting on Emma's arm, a silent vow of friendship. Laura looked at Nathan, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice raw but steady, "for seeing her when I couldn't." Nathan shook his head, his smile quiet. "She made it easy." The music faded, but the moment lingered, the ballroom alive with a new kind of energy, one born of truth and connection. Emma, her heart lighter than it had been in years, looked out at the crowd, no longer invisible but radiant, a girl who'd found her voice and her mother's love. The night had begun with isolation but ended with a dance that promised a future, one where Emma and Laura could face their pain together, with friends like Nathan and Mia by their side.